Subscribe because it's free.
The XY Theory Empire had conquered 100 worlds before Earth. Their strategy was flawless. Identify a primitive species, strike fast, subdue resistance, and integrate the survivors into their labor force. It always worked. It was going to work again. Grand strategist Akovar watched from the command bridge of his dreadnought as Earth's blue surface filled the screen. Reports scrolled across his display. Limited planetary defenses, outdated nuclear weapons, fragmented political alliances. Nothing here could pose a real threat. Proceed, he ordered. From the massive warships above, thousands of drop pods rained down, cutting through the atmosphere like burning spears. Cities below erupted into chaos as the invasion began. Plasma cannons turned streets into molten rivers. Towering machines crushed buildings underfoot, and XY soldiers advanced in formation, their armored exoskeletons reflecting the fires of war. Resistance was laughable. Earth's forces scrambled to mount a defense, but they were outmatched in every conceivable way. Their aircraft were swatted from the skies, their tanks obliterated before they could fire a second round. Civilians ran in blind panic, trampled under the weight of the inevitable. It was over before it even began. Akovar leaned back in his command chair, watching the carnage unfold. A single Earth rotation, he estimated. That's how long it would take for their leaders to surrender. Their kind always did. Fear was a universal language. Across the planet, desperate military leaders launched counterstrikes. But nothing worked. Missiles never reached their targets, intercepted by advanced point defense systems. Coordinated air assaults were torn apart by pulse weaponry before they could even get into range. The most advanced weapons humanity had, ballistic missiles, high-caliber artillery, electromagnetic railguns, were merely an inconvenience, the equivalent of a minor storm battering a fortress. And yet, something felt off. The humans weren't surrendering. They weren't running to negotiate peace. They weren't even hesitating. They were adapting. Within hours, reports of unexpected resistance flooded in. XY Theory forces advancing through urban centers found themselves in kill zones, boxed by collapsed buildings and ambushed from all angles. Civilians, untrained, unarmored, unprepared, began fighting back with terrifying ferocity, using homemade explosives, stolen alien weapons, even sharpened rebar. Across military networks, something else was happening. Unlike other species, humans weren't isolated by their borders or limited by chain-of-command failures. The internet, that once chaotic mess of entertainment and misinformation, had transformed into a global war machine. Strategies, weak points in XY Theory armor, effective ambush tactics. Everything was being shared instantly. A group of human hackers penetrated low-orbit communications, feeding false coordinates to XY Theory targeting systems. Bombardments meant for military bases hit empty fields instead. Dropships were redirected to heavily armed resistance zones, where human snipers awaited with armor-piercing rounds. And then there was the endurance. The XY Theory were used to wars of attrition, but their enemies always reached a breaking point. Humans, however, did not stop. They fought through shattered limbs, through the ruins of their homes, through the overwhelming certainty of death. Even when disarmed, they tore into their enemies with their bare hands. Akovar watched the reports unfold, his initial amusement fading into something he had never felt before. Doubt. A battalion of his best warriors had been sent to take a critical industrial complex in what humans called Eastern Europe. They were equipped with high-powered energy weapons and shielding technology far beyond anything on this planet. The battle should have lasted minutes. It lasted 2 days. The humans had booby-trapped entire sections of the city. They fought house to house, underground, in the sewers, from rooftops. They ignored wounds that would have incapacitated any other species. When plasma burned their flesh, they kept coming. The XY Theory did not know what to do with an enemy that refused to break. Akovar ordered tactical extermination squads to target key resistance leaders. The assassinations were partially successful, but it didn't matter. Where one leader fell, a dozen more rose in their place. There was no central figure holding the human war effort together. They were all soldiers now. Desperation led Akovar to deploy biodrones, machines designed to release neurotoxins that would shut down enemy nervous systems in minutes. On any other world, this had been an instant victory. On Earth, it was another miscalculation. Human biologists and chemists worked around clock, analyzing the toxins and devising countermeasures. Within 24 hours, an antidote was distributed through military networks. By the next attack, entire cities were immune. Nothing was going as planned. In one of the most shocking turns of the invasion, a human strike team breached an alien command post, eliminating high-ranking officers and leaving a single XY Theory survivor. They stripped his armor, tied him to a chair, and broadcast a message directly to Akovar's fleet. It was a warning. The image on the screen was dark, grainy, but the voice was unmistakably human. "You think you're the apex predator?" The voice growled. "You think we're prey? Silence. You have no idea what you've done." The feed cut. A chill passed through the XY Theory fleet. Akovar clenched his mandibles, feeling the first stirrings of unease. This was not how conquests were supposed to go. This was not how species reacted to overwhelming force. The humans were fighting like something else entirely. And for the first time, the grand strategists realized they weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. The XY Theory invasion had started as a display of dominance. Now, it was spiraling into something they had never experienced before. Akovar read the latest combat reports, his claws tightening against his armrest. The pattern was gone. Every species the XY Theory had conquered followed a predictable sequence: shock, panic, surrender. But humanity wasn't following the pattern. They weren't breaking. They were learning. Resistance had transformed overnight. What was once desperate and disorganized became surgical, efficient, lethal. Entire battalions of XY Theory warriors were being slaughtered by invisible enemies, killed before they could even understand they were in a war zone. The humans were changing the rules. Reports came in of snipers hitting commanders from 2 kilometers away, their bullets punching through XY Theory armor as if it were paper. Traps designed to sever limbs, pierce exoskeletons, and turn corridors into slaughterhouses. The humans didn't fight with honor. They fought with one objective: extermination. Entire units disappeared into urban hellscapes where every shadow held death. Buildings collapsed at the perfect moment, burying XY Theory squads alive. Abandoned vehicles exploded into firestorms the moment an alien patrol passed by. It wasn't war. It was hunting. And the XY Theory weren't the hunters. At first, Akovar dismissed the idea of human civilians posing any threat. That assumption didn't last long. Surveillance drones captured footage that defied logic. Untrained civilians taking down armored shock troopers with nothing but improvised weapons. An old man in a crumbling city square blew himself up, taking out an entire squad of invaders with a homemade explosive vest. A group of children, no older than 10, lured a patrol into a building rigged collapse on top of them. It was madness. No conquered species had ever fought like this. There were no negotiations, no desperate attempts at diplomacy, just an entire planet dedicating itself to a single goal: kill the invaders. And it wasn't just brute force. The XY Theory had never encountered a species that weaponized information as effectively as humans. Hack battle plans, false distress signals leading XY Theory forces into ambushes designed with mathematical precision, AI-generated deepfake communications, making XY Theory officers issue orders that led their own troops into death traps. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were turning the invasion into a game of survival, one where only they knew the rules. The XY Theory command structure began to collapse. Officers became paranoid, knowing their every move was predicted before they made it. The fleet's encrypted messages were intercepted, decoded, and used against them. It reached a point where XY Theory warriors stopped following orders out of fear they were walking into another human mind trap. That fear only grew when they realized the true nature of Earth. Humans called it their home. The XY Theory now understood the truth. It was a death world. Earth had been trying to kill its own inhabitants since the dawn of time. The planet itself was a living crucible where only the most adaptable, ruthless, and relentless creatures survived. Humans had no natural weapons, no claws, no fangs, no armor, yet they had outhunted every apex predator in their history. Their ancestors had chased prey for days without stopping, running them to exhaustion. They had built civilizations in the harshest environments, endured plagues, famines, ice ages, and still thrived. Akelvar had seen the survivors of past XY30 invasions. They never fought back. But the humans weren't survivors. They were predators who had been waiting for a real fight. And now they had won. The realization hit hard when the first reports came in about captured XY30 technology being used against them. Human engineers had reverse-engineered plasma rifles in record time, modifying them for higher efficiency and deadlier impact. XY30 drones were hacked mid-flight, redirected to attack their own troops. The humans didn't just steal weapons. They improved them. Then came the bioweapons. At first, XY30 Command dismissed the idea. Humans didn't have the technology or expertise to develop biological warfare against an entirely different species. They were wrong. Within a week, scientists from multiple nations collaborated to analyze XY30 physiology. They identified weak points, found natural compounds lethal to their biology, and began mass-producing targeted bioagents. Entire battalions of XY30 fell in their sleep, their bodies shutting down from a pathogen humans had engineered overnight. The few captured XY30 survivors spoke of horrors beyond comprehension. Camps where human medics worked day and night, not to save lives, but to study XY30 anatomy in real time. They weren't experimenting to understand their enemy. They were experimenting to kill more efficiently. Akelvar issued full planetary bombardment orders. If humans could not be conquered, they would be erased. The strikes never hit their targets. XY30 warships, designed to be unstoppable, fell from the sky, their own systems compromised by human cyber warfare. Orbital defense networks, once thought primitive, had been converted into high-powered weapons capable of cutting through XY30 hulls. Humanity wasn't fighting a losing battle. They were winning a war they were never supposed to survive. In a desperate move, Akelvar pulled his forces into defensive formations, abandoning entire cities in an attempt to regroup. But the humans didn't let them. They pursued. Every retreating XY30 transport was shot down before it could escape the atmosphere. Every remaining outpost was leveled by surgical strikes. The XY30, for the first time in their history, were experiencing total war. The humans weren't negotiating. They weren't taking prisoners. They were erasing their enemy from existence. Akelvar could no longer deny it. This was no longer an invasion. It was an extermination. And the XY30 were the ones being hunted. Akelvar stood in silence, staring at the holographic display of Earth. The war was no longer one of conquest. It was survival. The XY30 fleet, once an unstoppable force, was now crippled, reduced to scattered remnants desperately trying to maintain order. Communication was failing. Logistics had collapsed. Morale was shattered. But the humans? They were only getting stronger. Akelvar had seen many species break under prolonged war. Food shortages, internal strife, civil unrest. These were the natural outcomes of planetary sieges. Yet, none of it was happening here. Humanity had embraced the war. Across intercepted broadcasts, the message was clear. This was no longer about survival. This was vengeance. Factories that once produced cars and household goods were now churning out weapons at an industrial scale. Every hospital became a field clinic. Every citizen a soldier. Every city a fortress. There was no concept of surrender. Even the weakest among them fought. Surveillance drones captured a shocking reality. Elderly humans assembling explosives in underground bunkers. Children running messages through war-torn streets. Injured soldiers crawling back to the fight with makeshift crutches, weapons in hand. And worse still, they were no longer just using human tactics. They were stealing XY30 battle doctrine and improving it. Human commanders, once relying on brute force defenses, were now deploying formations that mirrored XY30 military strategies, but faster, more unpredictable, more vicious. They had studied their enemy, adapted, and now outmaneuvered them at every turn. The XY30 warriors, genetically engineered for combat, found themselves being slaughtered in battles they should have won. They were stronger, faster, more heavily armed, but none of it mattered, because Humans had something far more dangerous: instinct. They fought like creatures that had spent their entire evolution killing things bigger than themselves. They moved through battlefields with terrifying fluidity, ambushing with inhuman patience, striking only when the enemy was most vulnerable. And worst of all, they enjoyed it. Intercepted audio logs from human soldiers revealed laughter in the midst of slaughter, dark humor exchanged over battlefield radios, unshaken camaraderie in the face of certain death. They were thriving in war. The XY theory, for all their technological superiority, were crumbling. Entire warships, left in orbit for emergency retreat, were boarded and hijacked. What should have been an impossible task, a primitive species seizing control of advanced alien starships, was happening repeatedly. Human pilots, after mere days of exposure, were navigating XY theory vessels better than their original crews. Engineers were rewiring control systems, rerouting power, and unleashing devastating orbital strikes on XY theory forces. The war had flipped. Earth was no longer fighting to defend itself. Humanity was on the offensive. They had pushed the XY theory out of their cities, out of their strongholds, and now they were pushing them off the planet entirely. Aquavar received the final blow when the first XY theory warship was overtaken, fully controlled, and turned against its own fleet. A hijacked dreadnought, once a symbol of the Empire's dominance, was now humanity's spearhead. It broadcast a message on every open frequency, translated into perfect XY theory dialect. A human voice, steady, cold, emotionless. You are not the first invaders to come here. You will not be the last. But you will be the first to be completely erased. Silence. Then the ship opened fire on its former allies. The XY theory fleet collapsed in real time, warships turning against one another in confusion. Command chains disintegrating into chaos. Entire vessels, desperate to avoid capture, self-destructed rather than let human hands claim them. Aquavar realized, with growing horror, that the XY theory had already lost. Not just this battle, not just this war. They had lost to something they didn't understand. A species that should have been crushed within hours had turned the galaxy's most feared conquerors into prey, and humanity was still advancing. The message was clear. This war wasn't about survival anymore. It was about elimination. The war was over, not in the way Aquavar had hoped, not in the way the XY theory had ever imagined. Earth was still standing. Humanity was still fighting. But the XY theory? They were gone. What remained of their once mighty fleet drifted in orbit, either abandoned or hijacked. Those who tried to escape had been hunted down, not just in space, but across every corner of the planet. The lucky ones died quickly. The unlucky ones? They were captured, and humanity had no interest in prisoners. There was no mercy, no negotiations, no terms of surrender. The XY theory had come to Earth expecting a quick conquest. They had seen humanity as just another species to be enslaved, broken, and ruled. Instead, they had awakened something far worse. Something they had never encountered before. The true nature of humanity. This wasn't just a species fighting for its survival. This was a species that refused to be conquered. A species that thrived on war. A species that, when backed into a corner, didn't just fight back. It destroyed everything in its way. And now, the rest of the galaxy would know it, too, because humanity wasn't stopping. With captured XY theory warships fully operational, Earth was no longer just defending itself. It was mobilizing. Scientists and engineers had already reverse-engineered every stolen piece of technology, integrating it into their own. The same XY theory war engines that had brought destruction to Earth were now being mass-produced by human hands. The industrial centers of Earth, once dedicated to sustaining civilian life, were now entirely converted into war machines. The humans had learned, and now they would go to war on their own terms. The first targets were the remaining XY theory holdouts, those few regiments still trying to regroup across Earth's wastelands. They never got the chance. Drones hunted them day and night. Cities were sealed off, turned into open-air death traps. XY theory supply lines? Compromised. Escape routes? Blocked. The few surviving officers sent desperate messages, to their empire, begging for reinforcements. But no one answered, because even the XY homeworld had realized the truth. They weren't fighting to reclaim a lost colony anymore. They were fighting against a species that was no longer just defending itself, but seeking vengeance. And the humans had every intention of finishing what was started. The first human control fleet left orbit within months, heading toward the nearest XY colony, not with an offer of peace, not with a warning, but with one objective: eradication. They didn't just destroy the enemy's infrastructure. They burned their cities, seized their technology, and hunted every last XY soldier to extinction. The XY Empire had stood for over 1,000 years. It had conquered dozens of species, subjugated entire planets, crushed every enemy it had ever faced. And now it was crumbling in a matter of months. Because the war hadn't just changed humanity, it had created something new. A species that had always been divided by borders, by politics, by ideology, was now united under one purpose. Survival was no longer enough. They had learned what the galaxy truly was: a battlefield where the strong conquered the weak, and humanity had decided its place in it, not as prey, not as victims, but as the apex predators of the stars. Akelvar had always believed that the XY theory was the most powerful force in the universe, that no species could ever challenge them. He had been wrong. Humanity wasn't just another civilization to conquer. They were something else entirely. A species that should never have been provoked. A species that, once attacked, never forgot. And now, the rest of the galaxy would learn what the XY theory had learned too late. Earth had been just another target. But humanity had become the most terrifying force the universe had ever seen. And they were just getting started